Welcome to Pixel Realms, the podcast where two geeks dive headfirst into the gaming multiverse. They're basically like Gandalf in a headset, minus the wisdom and magic. So, grab your snacks and level up your patience. Pixel Realms, where the pixels are real, but the knowledge, not so much.
This is Pixel Realms, episode 21, The Console Wars. With your hosts as normal, Mark and Joe. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. We would really appreciate that. Now, Joe, we're starting off with the news, and shock of shocks, we're going to talk about Ubisoft for a quick second. But it's not bad.
Oh my gosh. So
I know, we're not shitting on them.
Yeah, so Shadows was released, and we've talked about Shadows a couple different times on this show. There was a lot of press around it, mainly because one of the main characters you play as is African American, and a lot of people were upset about that because why is it in the time period of where it's why is it in Asia in the time period where the Asian descent is dominated?
Can I just say that's such a stupid argument though, because they're basically if you know the story of Afro Samurai. There was an anime, and I think it's based off of something else. I don't know the history behind it, but they're essentially redoing his story.
Okay, interesting.
Basically,
I don't know enough about it, so I can't give my opinions on it, really. But the biggest thing, obviously, is because the new political landscape we are in here in the United States is a DEI and how it should be outlawed, and again, anyone who brings up that word should be shot and killed and thrown in prison or whatever it be. And that's what they're saying with the new Shadows, is that the African-American guy is a DEI hire, per se. And so, skip past that, and the game finally launched on the 20th of March. And surprisingly, it is doing extremely well. Metacritic overall has it at an 8, which is about on par with the standard Ubisoft Assassin's Creed game. And that's surprising.
Yep.
Mark's watched a little video. I watched some reviews and some video, and for the most part, people are saying if you enjoy the Assassin's Creed games, you'll enjoy this game. It has its typical Assassin's Creed issues. It's still Assassin's Creed. They've improved some things. They've stepped back a couple things. One of the biggest complaints is the story itself isn't as smooth as a typical Assassin's Creed story, but the world is supposed to be incredibly cool to explore and runs pretty well for the most part. Apparently there are some NVIDIA issues at launch, but for the most part it runs pretty darn good.
So I have a couple quick comments. I'm going to try and make them quick because we have stuff to get into. But so first of all, I watched about an hour or two of the gameplay yesterday. I was watching a streamer, and it very much operates very similar to the old Tenchu games, very much like stealth-based, sneak up behind them, kill them, maybe make some noise to lure them towards you so you can do another kill, or, at the very least, distract them so you can get around them. But I hate that people nowadays just don't know anything. So the African-American character in the game is basically just a retelling of Yasuke. He was a African man who had come to Japan in the 16th century during the samurai age, during the age of Oda Nobunaga. It's a real story. It's a legit thing that happens. They're just using that, maybe they are using the race card, right? Like maybe they did throw like, a black person in this game for that, but they're not just doing it willy-nilly. They're literally doing Yasuke. Like it's a real thing. There was an anime series and I think a manga or a comic book or something back in the day called Afro Samurai, which was very much like a stylized, hip version of the story, but it's essentially the same thing. Like, so people who are bitching about that kind of thing they just don't know history, or they don't bother to do their fucking research because, play the game and see if like it's bad first, and see if the character is done badly first before you say, "Oh, there's a black guy in the Japanese, style game." It's called history. It's called history. Read your fucking history, you numbnuts.
Well, we are 5 minutes in, and Mark had his first rant. So this is going to be an excitingly jam-packed rant episode, I think.
Oh no.
Let's move on to the next news.
Yes, but either way, I'm wrapping it up. Shadows looks interesting. I actually might play this. I haven't played an Assassin's Creed game, not even because I think they're bad. It's just that I never sat down and played one. And I legitimately started looking for ways to play it, either like straight up buying it or going to Ubisoft's thing. So, play the game and make your own judgments before you say, yap your bullshit.
Yeah, agreed. And like before we record this episode, Mark and I were both talking about potentially buying it or getting the Ubi, the what's it called, Ubi Game Pass, whatever it's called, for $18.
Yeah, it's the Ubi Pass. Like, we're not super happy with Ubi's price point being $18 for new games, especially because it's not like Game Pass where they're getting constant games from all kinds of studios. It's basically Ubi's Ubi shit, and they're not exactly putting out 100 games a month. But it is what it is. And now this next piece of news, go ahead.
I know that we've given Ubi so much crap, and they deserve it, 100%. But also, if they put the time and effort into this game to make it as good as they want to, this could be their turnaround. Every studio has a turnaround, or they go under. And do we want some other company to, I'm trying to find a way not to make this sound awful, but okay, if Microsoft, EA buys them, whatever, that's whatever. It is what it is, not how it happened. But there could be some other company that buys Ubisoft for the wrong reason, and not for its IPs. They could take it and make it more into a free to play, make it even more into
cash grabs.
Yeah, so like.
Yep.
I would like to see Ubisoft survive. They have some really amazing IPs. I would love to see them survive, and I hope this could be their turning point. And us as gamers need to realize that as well, that there are hundreds of passionate people working on this project. They're not there to, obviously they're making money, but they're in this industry because they like doing what they're doing, and they want to succeed as well.
Yeah, the thing is that like you don't want all of your games under one umbrella, because then they don't have to try. We've seen it in other media before. I hate using pro wrestling as a good example for a lot of things, but pro wrestling is a good example of when WWE had bought WCW, their direct competition back in 2001 or 2002, whatever year that was. They essentially stopped having to try, and wrestling got very stale to the point that it was no longer mainstream again.
Yeah,
and it's slowly coming back, and it's hot again. But like other things it's the best analogy I usually have for certain situations, and that's what it is. If Microsoft scoops up everything, or EA or whatever, they don't have to try as much to put out quality games. They can just be like, well, nobody else is putting out anything. You kind of have no choice but to buy from us. So we could just stick that sticker on there of saying buy the game for $11 billion 99, and you got to go, there you go, Mr. Microsoft. Here's your money. So at the end of the day, like, we'll shit on Ubisoft when they deserve to be shit on, and they deserved it a lot. But this isn't it. We don't shit on people because we like doing it. We do it because it's necessary, because they've done something stupid. So the fact that Ubisoft has come out with essentially probably a rare win, take it as that. Like, try the game, play the game, judge it for yourself, and if you don't like the game, then shit on it. But don't, find reasons to be hateful before you've even touched the game.
Criticism is important, as long as it's productive criticism. Just to say like, oh, that's crap. Well, why is it crap? Give reasons and statements behind it that could back up the reasoning behind it. You can't just say something as, I don't like green. Why don't you like green? There has to be a reason
Because it's
behind it,
green.
you know? Yeah. Speaking of green,
'Cause it's
green was
not
my
blue.
favorite Power Ranger,
Yeah.
Tommy, and that is the news we have next, which
You
is
stole my segue.
new Power Rangers live-action Disney Plus series is reportedly designed to reinvent the franchise. This is from IGN. And so the last time Power Rangers had some sort of a reboot in a series was the movie back in 2017, which Mark and I both agree was a fantastic movie. We had a
I
lot of
liked
fun
it.
with it. I love the ending. I love the cameo in there,
Yeah.
cameos, I guess. But it was great. It was fantastic.
My
And
only complaint is I didn't like the look of Goldar, like the
yeah,
fact that
yeah,
that was
yeah.
Goldar.
I
Like
agree.
that was,
Yep.
I thought that was awful, but I thought the way they played into it was fine.
Hmm.
I can understand why some people didn't like it. They tried to be too modern, too hip with the main Power Rangers. By each one had their own like stereotypical drama for being teenagers and issues, but at the same time,
It's
you
teenagers
know.
with attitude.
Yeah, but and at the same time, if they are real kids, like the original TV show Power Rangers was, where they were supposed to be real teenagers,
Hmm.
you know, the teenager can't be like problems that they had on TV. The stuff that the kids that were that in the movie were kind of more relevant. So I see what they were trying to do, and I do appreciate
It's
what they were
tough
trying to
now.
do.
Yeah, it's tough now
Yes.
because, think about us high school over 20 years ago.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
we're so out of touch with what kids are today. And even, when we were in high school, back in the early 2000s, like, or not late 90s, I guess it'd be as well, like, the the time frame was even different from our parents. So
Oh
every,
yeah.
every decade, every 20 years, whatever, the transition, sorry, is going to be different. And studios have to adapt to that. And it's really tough because when you have characters based around a time frame, it's
Yes.
hard to transform them into the next
I will
generation
kill you
kids. I'm very
in
good with the
Minecraft.
segue stuff. This is pretty good. Uh,
6
eh,
out of 10.
okay, okay. Anyways, we're excited
But
about it. We'll see what happens.
yeah, like
It's also
I've
very
I
early with this, by the way.
yeah, I'm an old school Power Ranger fan, but I also got into it late. I was essentially a teenager going into adulthood when I got into Power Rangers. Like I had a few years left where realistically I was playing with toys, and then by the time you kind of really get into that like high school years and you start trying to get a girlfriend and
You had
go
a
into
girlfriend?
adulthood. um I had a couple in high school.
Whoa.
None of them really lasted, but
Okay.
um I mean, I have two adult kids now essentially, but one's turning 18 in September, and one is an adult,
You're
but
just an old bastard,
they're
aren't you?
yes. But the relevancy of what was in that Power Ranger movie to my kids was definitely a lot more relevant to them than what the relevancy when I was watching Power Rangers
Yeah.
as younger, and what those quote unquote kids were doing. So they were a little bit more on point with the movie, but unfortunately, it didn't do well. It bombed because at that time we were in that kind of wave of people not going to those kind of movies. The Ninja Turtles, especially the second one, which they tried to do stuff for the fans by adding Krang, by adding Bebop and Rocksteady, by having the humans on screen a little less and being more about the turtles. Uh, it bombed, and then we never got another one. And the Power Rangers is kind of in that similar boat where they tried to do something fresh and new with that kind of franchise, and fans of it were like, we're still not going to spend our money. And now
Yeah.
we're stuck with getting another reboot. But I'm going to remain hopeful. Power Rangers is a franchise that it's very hard to screw up, and people have managed to do so. But if you just kind of stick to the formula, that Super Sentai, which it's super, super, super successful in Japan. Super Sentai, Kamen Rider, all those kind of shows are super big in Japan, and they're essentially taking that, bringing it over, editing it so that they could fit their actors in and add stock footage and stuff. And so they have a show already built to go, and then they have to essentially screw it up. and it's easy to not screw up. So just stick with the formula, forehead.
I feel that what we should do, Mark, for this,
Yep.
for when it comes out, whoever knows, maybe next year, but whenever it comes out, we should probably watch the movies, the episodes together, and do
Yeah.
a reaction video here on the podcast.
Look, I'm dying to get
maybe
in some
doesn't have
more
to do the
reactionary stuff.
doesn't have to do the
Yeah,
whole
yeah.
episode by any means, but it could be, the initial part. We could skip the news for that week and do the episode. I think it'd be kind of
Yeah,
cool
no,
since we
absolutely.
cover, gaming. We're also trying to get into entertainment more. So here in the
Yeah.
podcast, I feel people who are gamers likely like, that's awful English. English.
I mean,
I'm
you're
turtles who like the
all
Ninja Turtles, like the
you
Power Rangers, etc.
your English has been great this morning. I don't know what
It's
you're talking about.
it's beautiful. It's just gorgeous.
Fourth grade English.
I'm gonna finish it right here and talk about Mortal Kombat 2.
I will. I'm going.
So they they announced some of the cast that's gonna be part of Mortal Kombat 2. So this is a sequel to the one that came out in 2001. Is that correct, or 2002?
Was it that long ago? No.
Right? I'm pretty sure. Look it up real
Mortal
quick.
Kombat,
But I'm pretty sure it was
2021.
21. Yeah, that's what I thought.
You said 2002.
Oh wait,
0. Yeah, I'm
Yep.
about to say.
My English and my numbers are way off. That's what I
Yeah.
meant. I was like, it came out during COVID. I knew that.
People, Grandpa Joe he hasn't had his morning coffee. He's just
Listen here, Sonny.
Yeah, but no, it is based off. It is a sequel to the 2021 film. It did do. I'm trying to think. It did like 55 million, I think. So it didn't do well. It wasn't well received, despite it. I mean, I thought it was okay. I didn't like it like the original two movies, but those original two movies weren't good movies. They were more like cult hits.
And well, let's see. The thing is the studios also have to realize it is Mortal Kombat.
Yes.
It is for gamers, right? You have to realize this going into it. You're not going to get people who aren't gamers. So when the OG stuff came out, that's because the game was super hot back then. Mortal Kombat was the world. So the movie both the movies did pretty well. Now we fast forward all these years, and the games aren't doing.
The song is iconic.
Mortal Kombat.
It's transcended. It's transcended
for sure. And like the games aren't doing as well as they used to do because, well, they're mostly repetitive nowadays. So the movies aren't going to do as well either. So the studios have to realize that you're not making, a blood sport. You're not making the next Jet Li movie. You're making a Mortal Kombat movie. So expectations are realistic, and I don't know if the studios understand that. And that's interesting, bringing on Carl Urban, because he probably demands a lot of money.
Oh yeah, I mean, but like for the blood sport part, I think if you just kind of fantasize it, I don't know if that's probably not a word, fantasize it, glow it up, make it more. I don't want to say silly, because I don't want it to be too silly, but like blood sports, but flashy. Think blood sports, but Dragon Ball Z. Spiky hair, ridiculous costumes, throwing weird like energy balls and like that kind of stuff is kind of Mortal Kombat.
Yeah.
Stop focusing on trying to be a martial arts movie and, hone in on the weird character types, the flashy moves and that kind of stuff. And you've got yourself, probably a written story, a written movie, because it's not about the story. I mean, you want to make you really only need to make the story coherent. You don't need to make it elaborate.
Yeah.
Right. It's about bad guy, mythical bad guy, try take over world, hold fight tournament, beat up, people die, people win, yay. Unga bunga.
I think it'll be fun. Like as long as they focus on.
Looks cool.
Yeah.
The photo of Shao Kahn looks really cool.
Absolutely. As long as they focus on what the core, game movie was about, I think it'll be fine. It just don't expand too far. It's a simple.
I agree.
It's a simple thing, folks. A simple thing.
And so Joe,
Go ahead.
Joe, the console wars.
Oh, I thought you had a good segue. Come on now.
No, well, here's the thing. I don't segue like you, unfortunately, especially when you steal mine. But the console wars we've talked about in the past, right? We or at least I'm under the statement that the console wars are kind of just this fabricated thing that's like it wasn't real, but they like to call it a war because it sounds cool. It sounds, interesting, but it really wasn't a war. It was just about console release dates. Yes, sometimes they tried to release stuff around the same time as each other, but it usually kind of was a pretty dominated market.
In whose favor?
Whoever was relevant at the time, right? Because let's look back more recent years before we dive all the way back. Look at when the Xbox 3, I think it was the Xbox 360 came out. It slaughtered everybody. Nintendo has always been in its own little bubble. It never really participated in the console wars, in my opinion, because they just kept doing their thing. They were just going to be Nintendo, and Nintendo does what Nintendo does, and it silently just devours the competition because they're constant. So 360 came out, and it exploded, and it destroyed Sony. And then they got overconfident and they announced the Xbox One and blah, 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 blah. And then Sony just said, well, here's our console. It's going to be cheaper. And it's coming out here. And it had launch titles. And that for that particular wave, they obliterated the competition. And then they announced the PS5 and did exactly what Microsoft did and got overconfident. And they shit the bed. So, granted, as Microsoft didn't do much better.
Challenge you on that one.
Well, they shit the bed.
75 million PS5s have been sold.
Yeah, but at the time, 75 millions weren't sold because you couldn't get one for almost 2 years.
And that could be also part of COVID, though. There was this chip shortage and all that jazz. It came out in 2020.
It came out in 2020? Or the PS5?
The PS5.
Huh. That time that's showing my age and not knowing when stuff comes out. I don't remember it coming out in
verify it, but that's what my notes show, 2020.
You're probably right. You're better with that kind of stuff than I am, but I will verify it real quick. Yeah. Release date November 2020. So
right at the beginning of the pandemic, and
the pandemic had been going for almost a year. Because the pandemic really started.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah,
in February or March.
Yeah, you're right.
Right.
Yep.
So, but yes, you are correct that there was a chip shortage.
Yeah, that happened about 2021, and that's when the chip shortage happened for cars. Were issues for NVIDIA graphic cards, AMD, and all that stuff.
But to be fair, they did not come out swinging with releases. There were no big hits on the PlayStation 5 at launch. I think
that's been an issue though ever since the 2005-2006 console wars between the PS3 and the Xbox 360. After that, they kind of just stopped making launch exclusives.
I'm trying to remember Demon Souls. So Demon Souls and Spider-Man Miles Morales were their launch titles. So here's the thing. Miles Morales, I talked about it literally, I think we've talked about it maybe even last week, was essentially a overpriced DLC.
Yeah.
Miles Morales should have gotten his own game, a fully fleshed out brand new game. They were using the success of the character, and I think Into the Spider-Verse was either coming or had come out and was super hot at the time. I know Miles Morales was a hot topic again. And then Demon Souls, which was just a remake of the original Demon Souls. And that's what they came out with their launch titles. So they didn't come out with anything must play right off the bat. So, but yeah, you're right. About the releases.
I agree with you very much. Like the console wars hasn't so much been about two companies battling as it's been more about the consumers who've been making it more of a big deal. It's about us as the buyers, Are you a Sega or are you an NES? And now we're going to go back in time just a little bit because this is kind of when
Yeah.
it all started. There was the console wars of the 70s with Atari
Hmm.
and Intellivision, but like the main console wars started, the golden era per se of console wars was the Sega versus Nintendo battle. And everyone remembers it. It is Sonic versus Mario, right? You have the two
Yep.
biggest flagship people IPs that are available for consoles going against each other. And
Oh yeah.
it's interesting to see where things have played out now, right? Because Nintendo is probably even more dominant
Oh
than it
yeah.
was back then. And Nintendo still focuses on the same market. They've slowly expanded, very slightly expanded into more, but they're still focused on just their stuff. Their
Hmm.
their first party stuff. That's Nintendo, and that's been their way for the past 40 odd years, right? Is their IPs.
Oh yeah. I feel like it. I always find it interesting. I feel like people vastly underestimate Nintendo's staying power because they've had multiple consoles over the years that have kind of, I don't want to say bombed, right? Because all of Nintendo's consoles always sell pretty well.
Yeah.
But you could definitely say, like, for example, the Wii U. The Wii U would be considered a massive failure for most people.
13 million
But
sold. It's one of the lowest, I think it is the lowest console sold, period, combining Xbox and PlayStation stuff.
But people forget that that was just a prototype for the Switch.
Yeah.
They didn't give a shit about the Wii U. They were taking the Wii technology, advancing it a little bit with the Wii U, and wanted to see what features were really working, which weren't, and what weren't, so that they could develop the Switch. Like that was all a ploy, all a thing. Yes, they wanted to make money on the console. Yes, they obviously didn't put it out for the full intent of failing. But I think even Nintendo expected it to fail because you could see the lack of releases stacked with that console, and it still ended up having some good games. It's just it didn't feel stacked like other big Nintendo releases, and I think they knew that and they were prepared for that because they knew we've got something cooking with the Switch, but we need this time. We need this, you know, whatever you want to call the Switch or the Wii U's time in the sun to finish developing the Switch. So
Yeah,
I don't know.
there's a 5-year gap between the Wii U and the Switch that eventually launched and blew away the world. And people argue this all the time if you go on it, Reddit and whatever it be, but that the Switch only succeeded because of the pandemic. And yeah, I'm sure there were several million copies of the Switch that sold because of that pandemic, but also realize this, as we just talked earlier, that the pandemic brought its own issues when it comes to availability. Now, I know the Switch came out a couple years prior to, but when the pandemic hit, it was really tough to get a Switch. It was very difficult to get a Switch for that first year, probably through the pandemic.
I don't believe that. I hate that it's like, oh, it's because of the pandemic. The whole point of the Switch was to be portable, right? So that you would take it with you
You weren't going
during the
anywhere during the
pandemic. We weren't
pandemic.
going anywhere. So you could argue that that's not right either. The only reason why you could say that the Switch was successful during the pandemic was because it was cheaper. It was a cheaper price point than the other consoles. But I just don't think that's a good excuse because the whole point of the Switch was to play it at home and to take it on the road. So and here's the other thing. People forget that it came out in 2017. It was 3 years before the pandemic. So the fact that you're calling the pandemic the reason why it succeeded, it was already out for 3 years.
Yeah, agreed.
So already your argument's irrelevant.
So going back again, the golden era, Nintendo versus Sega. So the NES launched in '85, which is my year of birth, and then the Sega
I hate you.
Genesis was '89. So a
I
4-year
hate you.
difference. But okay, so what I thought was really cool though about there are all kinds of documentaries you can watch on this thing,
Mm-hmm.
and Netflix had a really good one that I watched a few years back. But what I liked about the console wars per se, quote unquote, was that these companies did throw out some really cool marketing strategies to
Yes.
try to get the fighting to go. And one of the things that Sega did, because Sega was like the new kid on the block, was a young hip teenager that wasn't taking crap from, you know, the guys over at Nintendo, the corporate Nintendo dudes.
No.
And the campaign back for Genesis was Genesis does what Nintendo didn't. Sorry, Genesis does what
Nintendo.
Nintendo. Yeah, Nintendo don't. And that was beautiful. That was genius campaign right there because they're playing on words, of course, and they're
Mm-hmm.
targeting right after Nintendo. And then even look at the main mascots, right? You have
Oh
Mario,
yeah.
which is the plumber, the little friendly plumber dude that's jumping on, pipes and saving the princess, and Sonic, who's just running through people, destroying them.
Oh yeah. Yep.
So it was really cool to see what was going on back there, and man, just to be, if I could go back 10 years, grew up 10 years earlier, and to be able to experience this would have been really cool as a young person to see all this advertisement and see, all this hatred on the block. Oh, you are a Nintendo kid. You can be my friend. I'm only going to go with the
So,
Sega guys.
as someone who was born in '83, um, I did witness this stuff. I saw the commercials when the especially 1990, I think, is when it really ramped up, because '89, I believe, was you said it was the release of the Genesis. I think
Genesis,
the
yeah. 91 was when the Super
so
Nintendo came out. So I
yeah
was 6
so
when that came out. So I got to see that stuff.
yeah so 90 through 91, I think, was when it really ramped up. And I remember seeing the commercials, and I remember buying into the hype a little bit because I was a Nintendo person, and Sega got me for a little bit there. I bought the Sega Genesis. I had tons of fun with the Sega Genesis, but it still it lacked the staying power because the Nintendo had already been out 4 years. The Super Nintendo. Some fans still to this day say the Super Nintendo is the best console. There's people who love the SNES, the quality games that had come out, the amount of games that had come out for the Super Nintendo back then is
Yeah.
just insane.
Mind blowing.
You could, yeah. So, and you know, it's just funny because Sonic was kind of it for them. Like, don't get me wrong, Sega had tons of games, but a lot of them came out on both systems. But and it was kind of cool, right? So because of the consoles being very different, you actually got two different games a lot of the times.
Yeah.
There was
Yeah.
a while there, like me and your cousin Vaz, we had talked about playing some of those old Disney games like Aladdin
Yeah.
and Lion King, and those games were different depending on which console that you had.
And that was the big thing between the two consoles,
Mhm. Oh
and the
yeah,
two companies itself, was Nintendo wasn't really pushing the boundaries when it came to technology at the time.
no,
Sega was. Sega, we can think for where we are with modern times. PlayStation and Sony took it one step further, but Sega's the one that pushed the boundaries to where we got. Think about the first CD on the Saturn, right? We had
hmm
our very first compact disc for gaming. Prior to that, was all consoles. I mean, it was all cartridges.
Yep.
So Sega was the one that pushed forward with that. Had Sega not have stepped in, Nintendo probably would have kept doing the cartridges for a very long time because that was successful. It was low costing and it worked out well. But Sega's like, no, we can put more information on here. We can make even better graphics. We can expand the worlds and the stories one step even further. And that ultimately, in my opinion, and a lot of people, is the downfall of Sega. Was that they pushed
Oh
the
yeah.
boundaries too far, and they were trying to reach something they couldn't, that the vast majority of consumers couldn't obtain yet, and that was where the Dreamcast failed, because the
Yep.
Dreamcast was online, and
Oh
not
yeah.
everyone
Yeah.
had online back then. And they
No,
were
they Dreamcast was really the the start of it, of the online part,
Yeah.
but it also was the victim of being the first one.
And yeah, the first one to the party isn't always the last one to finish. And that's
Exactly.
what happened with Sega. Had Sega not have pushed as far with those boundaries, who knows where technology would have been today? Because Sega threw on the mic, the controller. If you look at the Dreamcast controller, it looks very similar to what the Xbox controller, the Duke, kind of looked like when that launched. Obviously, there's just differences, but Sega also had the little cartridge you put into the controller, so you have a little screen on there that had animation things going on and whatnot. So again, these are things that were so advanced for the future that things we now do on our controllers, we can plug in a mic into the controller. We can plug in our headset directly into the controller and get all
Hmm.
the, all the features and stuff. So
Oh yeah.
it's sad to see that because I would love to have seen what happened, in an alternate world where Sega might have been the dominant one and Nintendo was the one that collapsed. Would the world be even further advanced when it came to, would VR? I would challenge anyone who'd say that Sega wouldn't have gotten to VR if, in today's world, if they were successful. Instead of Meta being the dominant force when it comes to VR now and Apple trying to be with AR, if Sega was the one that was pushing the boundaries with VR, could VR now have been a dominant actual use tool in the gaming world versus a small niche community?
Oh yeah, definitely. Like it's a very good what if to think about. I think gaming would look very differently, but then there's also the what ifs of like, well, yeah, it would look very differently, but maybe it wouldn't be as good. Maybe gaming would have collapsed because they would try to push technology too quickly, and there
Yep.
was there's one thing that people still got to take into consideration when it comes to gaming: the almighty dollar.
Hmm.
And pushing technology means more expensive, and
Absolutely.
more expensive means more money to shell out. And people were not always rolling in money,
Yeah.
so
We had
there's that
economy
to
collapses throughout
consider.
all that time frame.
Oh yeah, so more isn't always better, so there's a lot of what if situations where yeah, you could be the person that's like, yeah, but there's no point in dwelling on what ifs. You're not wrong, but there
It's
is.
just always cool to think about it, you know.
Yeah, because things could be very different now,
Yeah.
whether it be good or bad. So,
One thing that I don't know if the average person knows, and that is this. Okay, in the lifetime of Sega consoles, it's estimated that it sold anywhere between 59 to 62 million units. And that's all four of their consoles total,
mhm,
compared
mhm.
to the NES that came out in 83, sold an estimated of almost 62 million. So almost as many consoles as Sega sold in its lifetime, Nintendo sold with just the NES.
I mean,
That just tells you and how much the battle, while entertaining it was for the fans and consumers at
it's
the
very
time,
one-sided.
was very one-sided. And that's what we're talking about, when you first started the segue into the PlayStation and Xbox thing. That battle has been very interesting as well, because
Mhm.
we now jump to the next generation of the wars, right? We have PlayStation versus Xbox. Nintendo's there, but Nintendo's kind of in the corner, being like, "All right, you all duke it out. We'll come after you later." they're
Oh
they're
yeah.
they're kind of smart about things. And PlayStation. Okay, so we got PlayStation versus Xbox. So the initial PlayStation launched in '94. The initial
Hmm.
PlayStation sold 102 million copies. Okay, so what came out for Nintendo in that time frame? The 64.
Yep.
The 64
And the 60.
sold 32 million. 160 versus 32 million. Who won that battle?
Yeah. Yeah.
We know that the
Yeah.
PlayStation was a dominant force. And you're like, okay,
Oh yeah.
well, okay,
Oh
sure.
yeah.
They had their one console, right? Like Nintendo had their NES versus all of Sega's. They can't repeat it twice.
So Joe, real quick, before we go too much further,
All right.
think about this. The original PlayStation was supposed to be a Nintendo release.
Yes, it was.
So That's another good. We just literally talked about what ifs. Wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
that been interesting if that what if scenario?
Yeah.
What if Nintendo had kept the PlayStation, and released the console? Do you think things would be different, or do you think Nintendo
We
would do worse or better? Like,
and that's where things are very interesting because the
right?
PlayStation has been known to be the anti Nintendo.
Yep.
Nintendo's been the family, uh, family oriented console,
Yes, and
whereas
whereas
PlayStation's
the
like give you
more
the middle
adult
finger and
oriented.
everything else.
And they came out with games like God of War, which had like
Yep.
certain mini games that
Yeah.
and whatnot. So it's very interesting to think about if Nintendo had kept the PlayStation under their moniker and released everything. How very different the gaming market would be to this day in that regard. So that's another awesome what if scenario.
That's
But
really
that
cool
didn't
to think about.
happen,
It didn't happen. No.
and we see what happened. PlayStation blew up, and for a while, Nintendo was behind. But at the same time, they do what Nintendo does,
The
and they
PlayStation
just
20
stay quiet.
the PlayStation 2 25 years later still is the number one selling console of all time at 160 million copies. And Nintendo's slowly getting up there. I don't think it's going to make it now with the Switch 2 coming out, but the Switch sold 150 in the 8 years it's been around. So that's pretty
Mhm.
impressive number that the PlayStation 2 continued to dominate it to this day. Comparing it to what launched in 2000, well, that's where the Xbox war starts. And the initial Xbox, everyone thinks about this, PlayStation Xbox war, just like it was a Nintendo and Sega war, right?
Yep.
That they sold equal amount of consoles. Well, no. The Xbox sold 24 million copies. 24 million copies compared to the 160 million of the PlayStation 2. Not even a fraction. PlayStation's laughing at them. They're like, you can't touch me.
Yep.
But Xbox came in with serious gamers in mind. So they took
Yep.
the idea of PlayStation, which was, okay, we're going to be the anti-family oriented games. We're going to take it to a whole new level, and we're going to bring you deep character development and deep stories with our
Mhm.
consoles. And that's where we had Halo launch for the
Yep.
Xbox. And
Oh
Halo
yeah.
blew the world away more in the Xbox 360 than the Xbox itself when the 360 blew up. Now, here's the next question, the next what ifs, Mark.
Yep.
What if the Red Ring didn't happen on the 360?
Um,
Would
that
Xbox
was
360 have sold even more?
no,
You don't think so?
but it would be interesting to think about. But no, because the problem with Microsoft's gaming systems is they didn't take off in the one place that they needed to, Japan. There are
Yeah, that's true.
I've seen countless videos of uh, Xbox launches in big areas of Japan, Shinjuku, Shibuya, Tokyo, etc., where people would line up, for a big console release. People would line up and get their consoles. Some of those console releases would have one or two people in line for the Xbox console releases.
Yeah.
So the fact that Microsoft failed in certain markets that it needed to succeed, you need to, if you want to be a gaming console, you need to succeed in Japan because
Yeah,
that's where a lot of your games are coming from, anyways.
absolutely. And
But it is still something good interesting to think about, right? A world where Xbox does amazingly well and they dominate the wars and they keep dominating, and PlayStation ends up collapsing.
yeah. And the war between Xbox and PlayStation is rather interesting because I don't think, at least nowadays, the war and Microsoft's almost just given up on the actual home console itself. And we're going to get some more news down the road, and I'm sure once the official release is announced from Microsoft, we'll have a podcast for that. But the rumor is that they'll be going into the handheld market, so competing directly with Nintendo. And it'll be interesting to see how that works, because not only are they going after Nintendo, but then they'll also be going after the Stream Deck and
Yep.
or the Steam Deck. Sorry, Steam Deck. Is it called Steam Deck? What's it called?
Yes.
Yep, right. Okay.
Steam Deck.
I always get
Yep.
that one and the Stream Deck mixed up.
I mean, it's fair because it's literally just a letter.
Yeah. So this will be very interesting. But anyways, the ultimate war I feel now for Microsoft is not the console, not the hardware itself, but it's the IP
And
and
services.
it's their services. Yes, that's where the money is
Mhm.
coming from for Microsoft, and it's a smart tactic.
Absolutely.
And they
Oh,
have
yeah.
changed the landscape, because think of this: before the Game Pass came out, what other game, passes were there available?
I mean, Nintendo is very, very behind on
Very
their
behind.
online market. For a place that's so technologically, advanced with Japan, and with a company that's so deep in Japanese roots and origins, you would think that Nintendo would be on top of the ball, but no, they are. It feels like decades behind when it comes to a lot of their services. And
But I
PlayStation
kind of like that
really
though
dropped the
too.
ball too.
Yeah. So
Eh,
yeah. So my argument is this going to be for Microsoft. Microsoft's done some great things with their IPs. They've had some really
Absolutely.
cool things, but ultimately, what Microsoft has done has helped make gaming even more fun and challenging. Not so much in the game itself, but the achievements, because with the Microsoft console, the achievements was launched. Sony eventually came out with the trophies, and I don't even think Nintendo has anything yet currently in that category. But now on Steam, you can get what Steam call theirs. I don't know what they awards or whatever they call theirs on Steam. So Microsoft's made it more competitive when it comes to other things outside of the game. Have you unlocked all the achievements for that game? On the Sony, eventually, have you gotten all the trophies for that game? I
Mhm.
platinum, this. Does Microsoft have like a thing when you like Sony has with their platinum stuff? I don't know if
Yeah,
Microsoft has that.
there's a
100%, I guess.
reward thing. There's a thing that pops up occasionally, but I don't think anyone cares in a
People
weird
do.
way.
They do.
Do they?
Like, surprisingly, yeah, because like the reviews I'm watching for Shadows, uh,
For Xbox now,
what? Yeah, well,
the achievement shit.
yeah, people care about that. It's well, because it's built into the Xbox Pass or the Xbox app on PC, and then of course on the Xbox Marketplace or the Xbox itself.
Yeah.
But like the reviews I'm watching for Shadows, people are like, yeah, I platinum, this for I platinum all the Assassin's Creed games, or I've 100%ed all the Xbox Assassin's Creed games. So people do care. It's actually still a big thing. I hear the word platinum more than I hear whatever the Xbox term is
Yeah.
called. Or I'm guessing 100%. That's my guess. You just say 100%. But that's one of those things that Xbox has taken to a whole new world. Xbox Live was another thing that has changed the foundation of gaming
Yep.
hugely. Without Xbox Live, I don't know where online gaming would have been today. So the Microsoft platform has changed the landscape of console or in gaming in general, just as much as Sega has pushed the boundaries for gaming. Microsoft did the same thing.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. It's interesting to see the dynamics, because Sony has dominated the market in terms of consoles sold, period, totaling at 542 million total consoles, whereas Nintendo has sold about 431. So overall, Sony has sold about 110 million more consoles than Nintendo. But how much has Sony given to the actual gaming industry, right? Other than the consoles themselves, how much have they given to the community? So
No, you're right. I mean, you're right. You're absolutely right.
It's I don't know. That's one thing that I struggle to think about. Like, how does Sony still have the staying power? And it has to come down to what you were talking about before with the Asian market.
Yep. I think that's legitimately what it is that Sony's so rooted in in Japan, that's one of the main reasons, because it's definitely not as big as it used to be. And like I said, I jokingly say that I'm still waiting for the first game to come out on the PS5 because I kind of feel that way. There hasn't really been one single game that has come out that I felt like I had to buy my PlayStation 5 for. I did it. I did do it for Final Fantasy 16, but I did it more because of being impatient and wanting to play it than because of exclusivity. Because if I had just waited 6 months or so, 16 came out, for the PC.
Mhm.
So, there hasn't been a console exclusive console selling game. I mean, Astrobot is out, has been out, and it's, it won all kinds of awards, but I've never heard anyone run out to the store to buy a PlayStation for Astrobot.
And maybe it's because there's a shift somewhere in there that we're not paying attention enough to, Mark, you and I.
Mhm.
Maybe Sony has shifted their market to trying to capture some of the family-friendly stuff that Nintendo has done. Astrobot is an example. They had for the PlayStation 4, they had I can't think of the name of the game now. Knack. Knack was like their family-friendly platform kind of game. So maybe
Yeah.
Sony is slowly trying to adapt to that and pulling those market people or that market into the PlayStation and trying to reinvent who they are as a console so they can sell more home consoles.
Yeah. I mean, they definitely need to shift gears if they're not going to try and compete with Microsoft in the Game Pass market, which is now too late. There's no way.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah, they
there's no
lost.
way. Like,
There's
I
one
think,
dominant Game Pass, and that is the actual Game Pass.
yeah, like you could argue maybe if Nintendo really cared and really revamped their stuff and went after it, Nintendo could probably, compete with just their stuff alone.
But I
But
think Nintendo
that's
knows they
not
can
Nintendo.
sell their stuff
Yeah,
at their full
exactly.
price. Like, cause think about it, they almost never have their first party stuff go on sale. And if it is, it's
Yeah,
like $3 off, $5 off.
they'll have an occasional, thing like Mario Day, where they had like a pretty good sale on some of the games. But it's never like substantially huge.
Yeah.
We're talking
And it's always like the
we're
older
talking
games.
yeah, and we're talking like $10, maybe 20 or occasional 25, but usually it's like around that $10 price point off. Like, so if you're paying $69.99, it'll drop to like $59.99 or $54.99. But like, you're still paying about $60 for the game after tax and whatnot. So, uh, and Nintendo knows they can do it because Nintendo has a quality about them that people trust and and keep going back for.
Yeah, absolutely. So either way, the console war has been really cool. We've dived pretty deep into what we feel the console wars have been. We've talked
Oh
about the
yeah.
numbers, and we look at how things have changed within the industry. Microsoft coming in and being hard on the console. And maybe Microsoft had a big vision to begin with. Maybe their idea was, okay, well, we don't have a gaming platform at all. Let's get into it and see what we can do. And that's where the Xbox console came in. But their ultimate goal maybe wasn't to actually have a console at the end of it all. It was to find ways to make money based on their IPs itself. And if that was their goal, they achieved it 100%. They
Yeah.
bought out studios. They let the studios kind of do their own thing, and they've taken the world by storm with their Game Pass.
Yeah. So I guess the question, Joe, is let's take a second and ask the question: what does the future look like? What does 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road look like when it comes to the console quote unquote war market?
Well, and personally, what I feel is going to happen is I do feel by the time the PlayStation 6 comes out, and based on current trending patterns, I would say within the next 3 years, I feel that we're going to see Game Pass, the Xbox Game Pass, on a PlayStation network or a console. I also feel we're going to see a Game Pass on the Switch one day, probably the Switch 2 at some point. I feel that Xbox will enter the handheld market. I don't know if they're going to be successful, though. I don't know. I question the motive on this one. But I do feel that Nintendo will be super successful with the Switch. I don't think it's going to be as successful as the first Switch. I don't think so. But I do feel that the handheld market's going to be dominated by Nintendo. I think they own that one. I don't feel that the PlayStation 6 will be that successful. I think they're banking too much on their IPs, which they do have some really good IPs. But I don't think the IP is going to sell anymore. That's clearly the case with Microsoft. Nintendo owns their IPs and make their IPs just for their own platform. I don't think we're going to see Mario games on PlayStation or Xbox.
Nope.
So
Or PC.
Or PC. I think what we have right now, I think is going to be about the same in the next 5 years. And that's concerning because we're not having a drastic change.
So I mostly agree with everything you're saying. I think Microsoft continues to push Game Pass to the point that they don't even think about a new console outside of maybe that handheld. I could see, based on how much content they have for Game Pass, I could see the console doing relatively well as long as it can run the games, decently well, like the Stream Deck, or sorry, now I'm doing it, the Steam Deck. I do kind of agree. I think PlayStation continues its downward trend of trying to figure out what they want to do and not being able to figure it out. And I won't go as far as to say I think we see the end of PlayStation, but I do think
I think we're far away from that.
I do think that they are going to have to rely heavily on other people, other companies' stuff, like the Game Pass, for example, to essentially sell their hardware, because Nintendo's going to keep doing what Nintendo does. They're going to keep releasing their stuff. They're going to probably, they'll probably have a little bit of advancement in their online stuff, but not by much. Like they have clearly shown that they want to stick to the hardware. It's about the hardware and it's about the games for Nintendo. Whereas Sony and Microsoft were always trying to do a little bit of everything. They were trying to get into the DVD, Blu-ray market. They were trying to get into social media. They were trying to get into Spotify type stuff and streaming services. So I think you're going to see the kind of the shift in the console wars, where it's not really a console war, because it's going to be, it's not going to be about Sony. It's going to be about PlayStation versus Nintendo, but it's not going to be a competition, because Nintendo is going to outsell everybody as a console, because they are a console system first, whereas Sony tries to do everything. And they just don't have enough IPs. They do not have enough IPs to stay relevant against Nintendo, especially when all of your IPs eventually end up on PC.
Well, because and that's their strategy they're taking now, is they're trying to get their IPs over to PC because they need to make more income. And like Sony themselves had said it, pretty much plainly, that the versions they sell on PC is free money. It's free money. That's what they say, in lack of better words. And that's a good tactic to take, because bringing these IPs over to, okay, so here's the thing though. What is their tactic? Do they think that bringing over God of War and Last of Us and Horizon Zero Dawn over to PC is going to get PC gamers to buy a console? Because that's not going to happen. That is never going to happen. No, PC gamers are PC gamers. But I think what I think their strategy is to just make at least some money off of those IPs, period. They're never going to launch day one like Xbox is launching day one their games on console and PC. They're always going to be PlayStation exclusive first.
Well, because they're already doing it, and I don't think they're going to change the mold too much. Their big IP stuff is going to be going to be a console exclusive for a year, maybe even 2 years. and make all their money that way, and then they will release it for the PC after it's kind of lost its relevance. But at the same time, even though it loses its relevance, it kind of comes back full circle. Like The Last of
Hmm.
Us does, sells really well. Spider-Man sold really well for its PC launch, but it didn't like sell well enough to become huge again.
Yeah.
But by then they'd made all their money on Spider-Man. They recouped their losses or from making the game and their time, and then so it's just free revenue. And I think that you're going to continue to see that. You're going to see that. You're going to see stuff like Final Fantasy 16 release where it comes out on the console first. You get about 6 months so that the hardcore PlayStation people get to play it first, and then it comes over to PC where the other people get to play it, and
So
it does well. So I think it's going to stick to the same status quo for the most part.
66,000 people have played Spider-Man 2, or sorry, Spider-Man 1 on Steam when it was launched on Steam, which is a pretty impressive number, 66,000. And
Mhm.
Spider-Man 2 is about 28,000. So substantially less, and that was expected to begin with. But I think 66,000 sold on a PC is very successful. If you break those numbers down, so if it sold for $60 each, and obviously these numbers are going to flex depending on what market you buy the game from, but that's almost $4 million worth of a title, which is impressive. And Spider-Man is one of their, Spider-Man is a big name compared to say Last of Us, which also sold a big numbers. Last of Us, the first one, sold 36,000 on PC. So again, free money.
Yeah,
And Last of
exactly.
Us probably succeeded even more so because of the series that came out, but God of War sold 73,000. So, free money, free money. Now, these 73,000 people that bought the PC version are not going to go buy a PS5. You might have
No,
had, a couple hundred maybe so they can play God of War Ragnarok, but that eventually came to PC as well.
yeah. I mean, the original Spider-Man game was in 2018, and it was for PlayStation 4. So, it was at the end of that console cycle, but it came out, and I believe I don't have the numbers right off the top of it, but I believe it sold um, pretty damn well, and it got a remastered re-release on PlayStation 5, and again sold pretty well because it was basically the same game, but they gave it a glow up. They made it a lot more uh prettier. So I mean, by that point they probably made a lot of that money back, I believe. So Spider-Man sold for 3.3 million, uh, and that's including the being bundled with the PS4.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So 3.3 million is pretty good.
Yeah.
I would say. I don't know how much it costs to make the game, but it still came out and it did really well, and then it had its Miles Morales came out later for the PS5, but it was essentially the same, kind of off the backbone of PS5 um, Spider-Man. So yeah, I mean, and that's just going off Spider-Man, right? That's just following Spider-Man. That's not even including, The Last of Us, God of War. I guess you could argue stuff like Days Gone. Some of these other IPs that are, you know, big for Sony as well. So I mean, that's just one. That's just one. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I think that's what it's going to be. Is I think it's going to continue to be like that. I think it's going to,
I think it's fine
you
though
know,
because there needs to be a console. There needs to be a home console. I
yes,
100% agree with that. One that's not portable, one that's high powered, that takes advantage of HD and 4K and all that jazz, right? There needs to be that, and Sony has that. They are the dominant force in that, and Xbox or Microsoft's like, okay, that's fine. Let's take over the live services portion of that,
yeah,
and Microsoft has done
exactly.
that. There is no competition to that. It'd be interesting. Here's a thing. Here's a what if. What if Steam came out with a Game Pass? Huh?
Um,
What if Steam had a $25 a month or whatever, and you have access to a million games? They might destroy Xbox,
yeah, I think they would.
but I don't think Steam would
That
ever
would have
do
been
that. I don't think that's their
no,
goal. Their goal is to have the
no.
games available to buy, not to license them out, whatever.
Yeah, but that would be an interesting what if scenario where like the gaming world would look very different if Steam had come out, from the get go and been like, yes, you can buy the games on our Steam, or you can, essentially rent the games for as long as you have an active membership,
Hmm.
and you can play the games to completion if you don't want to buy the games. Or they could even segue to having like, massive discounts on the game if you have the pass, or like they could finagle something for sure that I think would have made it massively successful. So, that's a great little what if scenario as well, and would have definitely changed the way everything looks today. So, they're gaming. The bottom line is the gaming's not changing, right? Like it's changing in the sense of technology's changing. Unfortunately, price is changing. Just the style of games coming out, and whatnot. But when it comes to the companies, the markets, at this point, it's going to be a little hard for any company to come in fresh and
Yeah.
and get into the market. So I think you're pretty much kind of where you're at, where PlayStation has a little bit of everything. You still get your home console, you still get your exclusive releases, even if they might eventually end up on PC. But they do a little bit more of the online aspects that Nintendo doesn't do. And then Nintendo is your strict kind of console for games, even if they are bought digitally. It's still about just their core games. And then Microsoft does their Game Pass and buys more companies, or has companies put out more games, and then tries to break into the the handheld market, which it could be very successful. Do I think it's going to do as good as the Steam Deck? No, I think it's a little too late for that. I think PlayStation tried to get into the handheld market and ultimately failed. Granted, Nintendo was huge in the handheld market, and now you could argue that the Switch is in the handheld market, but at the same time isn't.
Yeah.
So, I mean, especially since their online services aren't great, it really isn't about the online market for Nintendo. It's just about, yeah, I can take the game that I'm currently playing on the go with me, not, get online with other people and play some kind of game, which is what, Game Pass / Microsoft / Sony, can do.
Yeah, agree. These are a lot of what ifs, and it's just really cool to reflect on the console wars itself and how
Yeah.
not competitive it really was, but how it still was in other
Yeah.
forms and factors. If you look at
It
the
was
grand scheme of things, how things played out.
Yeah, it was very competitive to us in our minds, but ultimately, when you look at hard numbers and figures, there was no real war.
Yeah.
It was fabricated by us.
All right, Mark, anything else to add to this episode?
Nope, that's it. We are slowly pushing towards the upcoming Switch 2 announcement that I think a lot of us are excited for.
Yeah.
So,
So our next episode here on the podcast will be shortly after the announcement of shortly after the Switch 2 Direct on April 2nd. So we're really excited to cover that for the episode, and hopefully we'll have a lot of cool things to share about it. I'm sure we'll have games for day one. I'm sure we'll have pricing. And then hopefully they'll have a date for the Switch 2 as well. So we'll be covering that on the next episode of Pixel Realms.
Yeah, real quick, Joe. Like just off the top of your head, because we don't want to talk about it. Launch title. Give me one or two launch titles for Switch 2.
Well, obviously it's going to be a Mario game. It's probably going to be a platform Mario, and it's probably going to be a Mario Kart.
All right, I'm gonna say new Mario Kart, which I think is obvious, and I'm gonna say the new Pokemon game. The Pokemon Legends ZA, I think, is gonna be
Didn't
a
think about
launch
that.
title.
Yeah.
All right. But
Interesting.
yeah, that'll be our next episode. I just figured I would throw that in there because we've got that coming up next. And as always, thank you everyone who does listen, who takes the time to give us a click, and give us a chance. And I look forward to the next one.
No, we'll see everyone next time. Take care.
Bye-bye.